Mina Malik Hussain, and you're watching The Coffee Table, and today it's all things water. It is more exciting than you think it is. It really is. Today we're going to be talking about freshwater resources, we're going to be talking about safe drinking water, we're going to be talking about sanitation and toilets, and it is, I promise you, much more fascinating than just toilets or just clean drinking water, because it's such a complex thing. And the statistics are actually freakishly alarming, and globally, 1 in 4 people have no access to a decent toilet. 1 in 10 people have no clean drinking water facility close to their home, which means that they have to travel distances to get said water. And 31% of schools around the world don't have clean water at all. And I think that the most alarming fact that I read about water recently was that every minute around the world, a newborn dies of a waterborne disease. So fresh water and clean drinking water, actually not just fresh, but clean drinking water is a massive problem all around the world. It's a global condition. And I think that in many ways, we don't talk about it as much as we should be talking about it. So today on The Coffee Table, at least there will be 40 minutes of talking about nothing but water. And well, I'm delighted to welcome on set with me today Ali Hassan Habib, who is a great favorite of ours at The Coffee Table. He is the former head of the WWF Pakistan, and he is the managing partner at the environmental and social concern HEMA. And joining us across the internet is Munawar Hassan, who is the head of programs at WaterAid Pakistan. Hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, something that we were talking about before was that, and I thought that it was such a wonderful thing, is that you said that all the water that Earth gives us, or natural water, comes to us clean. And I thought that that was really lovely, because it's true, isn't it? And then us humans are mucking it all up. So most of the water in Pakistan that we have comes from glaciers.
Correct.
Which means that it, at the source, it's fairly clean.
Correct.
It's pretty clean.
Yes.
And then what happens as it sort of comes down?
So I think you're right that the water that humans use is either surface water or from the ground.
Okay.
And generally that water is clean because nature has its own way of cleaning the water. You can imagine if you, it's surprising that you go into a forest, there are no municipal corporations, there are no toilets, animals are defecating all over the place, things are dying, rotting, and yet when you go to a spring or a stream, the water is clean. So nature has a magical way of presenting clean water.
Yeah.
So as you said, Pakistan is unique that 70% of our water in the rivers comes from glaciers high up in the mountains.
Yeah.
And when the glaciers melt in the summer, the water percolates, travel long distances, and that water is clean when it is presented by nature. What humans do is another matter.
By the time it sort of reaches halfway down the river, all sorts of things have joined it. All sorts of terrible things have joined it.
Yeah.
So in urban spaces, though, that the water that we use is mostly surface water, underground water.
Correct. In urban spaces, generally water is pumped from the ground. And if it is not clean, then obviously it needs to be processed or treated so that it becomes potable or drinkable. At one time when I was a child growing up in Lahore, we would all drink water from the tap, which I think you don't remember.
No, but I used to also drink water from the tap. I'm not as young as I look. No, but it's true, I remember this, drinking water from the tap or from the pipe in the garden.
Yes.
Because it was all the same water.
We wouldn't get sick.
No, we really wouldn't, actually. Yes, again, this is why we're here on the show to talk about all of these terrible things. So, hello, Munawar, can you hear me from across the internet?
Yes, I can.
Yes, excellent.
And can you hear me clearly?
So, Munawar, tell me, because your work is with WaterAid, and WaterAid is this wonderful organization that does so many amazing things around the world to get safe water to people. How does one define dirty water?
Okay. Thank you very much for having me on this show. Actually, dirty water is contaminated water.
Right.
And contamination is natural as well as human, both. as you were just discussing that water is always safe when it comes from nature. Yes, in most cases it is. But even within the nature, for example, groundwater, which is subsurface, when it mixes with certain kind of elements, which are hazardous for human health, it becomes contaminated, mainly chemically. For example, arsenic and sometimes some other elements which mixes with the water, and that water is not potable, that create loss of disease. But having said that, in most cases, natural water is safe. Now, when we would like to define contamination, there are 3 types of contaminations, mostly that we come across. One is chemical contamination. That is from 2 ways. One is natural, like I said, in groundwater, you find certain minerals or elements dissolved, and when you extract that water, those are already there. You cannot even sometimes see it. It looks like very clean water. Arsenic, you could not see arsenic ever. You can only test. Test means not the testing, but test and in the laboratory, and then you know, oh, there is arsenic.
Yes.
Similarly, extra calcium, similarly other minerals. And there is another type of contamination, which is biological.
Right.
And biological contamination is something that is normally because of the bacteria or any organic substances that mix with the water, makes it contaminated. There's the second type of contamination. There's a third type of contamination, which is relatively, less harmful, but actually easily identified or detected by a human, is physical contamination. That is the taste of water. That is the hardness of water, because the water you use in the home, and if it is not giving you proper, lather when you wash your clothes. So it means it seems like, the detergent is not working. It's not the detergent. Actually. Water is heavy. We call it a heavy water. All these are physical contaminations, and the color and the turbidity, like particles of the sand in the water. All these are physical contaminants. So these contaminations sometimes are human. For example, chemical contamination can be human and is human currently. When we see the huge amount of sewage. Sewage of our cities, as well as the chemicals from the factories and production units go into the freshwater bodies untreated. All these are chemical contamination, which human create actually.
And I believe that a great deal of chemical contamination of water comes from industry, and specifically leather and textiles. So how do, for example, let's say as a layperson, I'm thinking of a factory, and then there's runoff, and the runoff goes into the nearest water body. And then how does that water get into the groundwater then? Because if it's in, like, for let's say a sewage canal or a ganda nala, as it were. So how does that water then contaminate the groundwater?
There's a natural percolation in the ground, because soil is porous. We all know that there are very small and tiny pores between the soil particles. So water always keeps percolating. And obviously, if it's over the period of time, and if our factories or industries, they keep discharging all these chemicals for a long time, then percolation is also for that much of time, and gradually it reaches to a level where it touches the aquifers, the groundwater aquifers, and then start mixing up. So that is very much possible that they contaminate the groundwater. But the obvious contamination of these chemicals is to the freshwater bodies that we call them surface water bodies, like streams, rivers, canals. Most of these industries, they throw their contaminated sewage into those freshwater bodies, and that is surface water. Pakistan's topography is such that
it's frustrating to hear,
the northern
because
side,
there's just not enough fresh water in the world, and then the fresh water that we do have is being contaminated by toxic waste. It's so irresponsible.
True. Just wanted to add what our colleague was saying. It's very true that sometimes groundwater can be contaminated by natural minerals or chemical compounds like arsenic, which is harmful for us. But we also have to keep in mind that sometimes when we use groundwater, we can overuse it. Overuse means that we're using much more than can be naturally replenished. So for example, even in the city of Lahore, we keep using groundwater, so the water table keeps going down. We have to go deeper and deeper.
Yes.
And sometimes when we go deeper, the chemical composition of the water changes. So if we had used it from the surface, we may not have had as serious problems of contamination even from natural sources.
Oh, because I suppose that the point of those layers
Yes.
is that water is present here and minerals are here. And
Correct.
they're not supposed to be mixing.
Yes.
But
in
now
fact,
we
the
are.
term used is water mining. So if we use more water than can be naturally replenished, for example, cities like Quetta, it has very low rainfall.
Yes.
So the water that is naturally replenished is of a smaller quantity. So if we overuse it, the groundwater table keeps going down and the chemical composition of the lower water may be different and problematic. Maybe our colleague can comment.
Yes,
a bit more.
absolutely. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick break. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. We're having a really fascinating conversation about water with Ali Habib and Munawar Hassan. And before the break, we were talking about overuse of water. So from what I understand, Ali, is that we overuse water because there's a scarcity of water. And then it becomes a kind of vicious cycle then, whereby if we keep using the groundwater and then the groundwater, there isn't enough of it, then how do we approach water scarcity then? Now, what is the community to do if, for example, the wells have dried up because the groundwater just is that low?
Right. So I think the first thing to do is to assess how we use water. And one of the terms used for that is efficient use of water. The United Nations has a Sustainable Development Goal number 6,
Yes.
which is about water and sanitation.
Okay.
And one of the sub-targets is that by 2030, we should use water efficiently. So the question is, if you want to grow 100 kilograms of wheat, how
Yes.
much water do you need? Or 100 kilograms of rice, how much water do you need? And you'll be surprised that one can actually grow the same amount of produce that we need with less water. So when there is scarcity, the first thing to do is to be more efficient in using water. This is just one example.
Yes.
Another example is that water usage should be measured. Even today in parts of the city of Lahore, like we have electricity meters or gas meters, some houses don't have water meters. So they do not know how much water they've used. They get a fixed bill. So there's no incentive to use less water.
And
So I
then-
think that's one example
And I
what we
suppose
can do.
It's a perception thing also, that as long as water is coming in the tap, of course there's water. Like people, I think a lot of people don't seem to think of it as a scarce resource.
Correct.
Which is something I want to sort of cycle back to. But Munawar, because water aid does a lot of this kind of work, when we talk about water, we always must talk about sanitation as well, because the two things do go hand in hand. And the fact that water scarcity is also a reason why a lot of people in the world don't have access to sanitation and to proper sanitation. So why is sanitation so important? Because, I think even culturally, it's not a big deal if you just go to the bathroom in the field, but it actually is a big deal. Tell us why.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, sanitation is an outcome of water. So we cannot, separate them out.
Yeah.
And when we call that sanitation is an issue, many people, as you said, they said, how come? Because for the centuries, we used to go to our fields and defecating in open. I won't say that going into the field in the bathroom, but defecating in the open, actually, that's what we used to say normally. So they even don't feel shy, Exactly. But sometimes, not sometimes, always, when we defecate in open, and even the least thing that humans should do is to cover our feces. We don't do that as well. Feces lying there, and all the flies that sit on it, all the mosquitoes that sit on it, and then they come on our food. Flies particularly, they come on our food. And in a way, we are eating our shit by ourselves.
Oh, God.
This is why open defecation is a problem.
Oh, gosh.
It is a problem. And,
And then
this
also
one
sort of
thing,
hand washing also, because then that's the sort of part of defecation or sort of, using the facilities as it were, is that hand washing then is also the second part of that. And if there isn't any water, how are you going to wash?
Exactly. So these all are linked. When you say hygiene and hand hygiene, I mean, this one simple, very simple act, we are seeing in COVID situation now, there's a huge emphasis on hand washing. But we used to promote it since years, that this should be our integral way of living. Hand washing before eating, hand washing after defecation, hand washing after doing household chores, hand washing after playing. Whenever we touch a contaminant surface or some element, we have to wash our hands so that we should not bring all those germs into our stomach. And globally, as you said in the beginning, that one child dies every minute. Most of them die because of waterborne diseases. And only simple act of washing hands can reduce the death of under 5 children by 1/3. 33% deaths. And when we say 33% deaths can be saved without any investment, only changing our behaviors and our practices.
Yeah.
Do you think there's worth in it?
No, absolutely. And the World Bank has a sort of recommendation as well that apparently it is the most cost-effective way to reduce, as far as health interventions go, awareness and sanitation and awareness of hygiene is one of the most cost-effective ways to do it. And it's really interesting to kind of think of water in that sense, that you're actually helping save people's lives and make them healthier when they have access to safe water, because you're not drinking contaminated water. And could you tell us a little bit about the kind of projects that Water Aid commonly sort of is doing in Pakistan as in terms of clean drinking water for communities?
Yep. Mainly we work with rural-urban both communities. For urban, it's mainly the quality of water. For rural, it's access plus quality both.
Oh, okay.
So in Pakistan, we normally say people have access to water. For example, we achieved the MDG target, and we proved that 90% population has the access to drinking water. But when we started to discuss the quality of water, the percentage reduced. And it is a severe problem in Pakistan. You have seen that we never drink tap water.
No,
and we always use bottled water. Not always, but in most cases, we use bottled water for drinking.
As far as possible.
So, exactly, as far as possible. So in the villages, since it's the excess of water, so we work with the communities to develop either groundwater supply schemes with pipe supply or providing hand pumps close to a cluster of houses, so that it's easy for women to collect water more easily than walking distances and collecting the water. Then we in the cities we normally work on quality water. For example, we are installing the water filtration plants. We are working in Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad to install water filtration plants with obviously support of different agencies who help us. And this is just to ensure that as many people as we could reach out, we could reach out with the safe drinking water. But on top of that, our intention is that we should create models which the government can take forward later. So there are, you must have heard about installation of filter plants up to Union Council level. Some 15 years ago, there was a project by the government that we are going to install filtration plants at Union Council level.
Okay.
But they didn't work because installation is one thing. Maintaining those facilities is important. There was nothing, no finances were spared, where these are continuously repaired and maintained and people get benefit for a long time.
Yeah.
What we do, one, we keep the capital cost low. Right. We are demonstrating that filtration units should not be 200 million or 300 million rupees. These could be 50 million, 5 million, 10 million. There are number of options available in the market. We should just explore, number one. Number two, who would take the responsibility of operation and maintenance when these are there? So either community or the government.
Yes.
Either of two should take the responsibility or together, and then these. So most of the things which we have installed, I really feel happy when I go back. Like I went to Lahore a few weeks back, and we installed those filtration plants 3 months back, 3 to 4 months back. Those are working. People were happy. I spoke to a lady, I spoke to a boy, and they were so happy that, we were literally looking for this type of facility. So, this gives you lots of confidence that if government also bring the stakeholders into these, choices and also ownership of the same, they will take the responsibility. Our people are not that irresponsible. They are in some cases, but not always.
In some cases, I like that. No, but it's really interesting because we are all mutual stakeholders in this. And when we talk about sustainability, it really has to be, everybody has to be on board.
Yes.
So it needs to be sort of ground up and top down because a lot of environmental degradation, which sort of everything, is being caused by industry, and there needs to be then regulation, and the government needs to step in, and then also then communities need to kind of work together. So everybody has to kind of pull along.
So I think I'd just like to add what Munawar said. The key point here is that the sense of ownership amongst the people who are both the beneficiaries and can have a main role in keeping the system operational.
Yes.
And clean drinking water is a classic example. So if clean drinking water is available in a neighborhood, the same people benefit. I'd like to give the example of another program which is showcases a successful approach. This is a fairly small NGO out of Faisalabad, Anjuman Samaji Behbood, and there's a program called the Changa Pani program.
Oh, how nice.
Which the Punjab government has adopted.
Yes.
And they've tested it out in a union council in Lahore, in Bhalwal, where they changed the approach of how the government would have done a typical water supply project, like a cookie cutter in every neighborhood. So this approach is that the external and internal facilities are managed separately. So external is sort of the big pipeline coming into the neighborhood is the responsibility of the government.
Right.
But the internal or the small pipelines going to each house, the water meter in each house, and how well it is maintained, how the billing takes place, that is taken over by the community.
That's excellent.
And it seems to work well. Obviously, the assumption is that the community has to be willing, has to be functional. If the community has conflict amongst each other, then it would not work. But as Munawar is saying, people inherently are willing and are able to volunteer a lot of time and effort if the government provides the right platform. So we're seeing quite a few examples. Another example is the Aga Khan Foundation in Gilgit-Baltistan, where they provided 12,000 household taps, 10,000 latrines, 500 community water supply facilities. And the research showed that there was a 60% reduction in waterborne diseases.
Wow.
So once the people see that, then they have a sense of ownership. So the government should move away from a cookie cutter approach of contracting to the same contractors and taking on responsibility for everything. Give the responsibility to the communities who are also beneficiaries.
And like Gilgit-Baltistan, a community there, their requirements and the challenges they face will be completely different from a community in Bhalwal.
Correct.
Even just geographically, they're so diverse.
Socially, geographically. So the government has to be sensitive to those dynamics.
Yeah, excellent. We're going to take a very quick break and come back to this fascinating conversation. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. We're talking all things water. It is such a fascinating and complex, but also really simple in some ways, conversation. So, Ali, I know that, and I was, again, WWF nerd here. There is a global freshwater strategy, and part of that freshwater strategy, because freshwater A, there isn't that much of it in the world, and B, it has to be shared by many living creatures. It's not just humans, but it's also marine life. And then part of that strategy includes a thing called water stewardship, which I find really fascinating, and now tell me everything.
So water stewardship is, as you say, a fairly simple concept, but not necessarily easy to implement. So basically, anyone who becomes a water steward announces a commitment to be aware of how much water they use for whatever purpose they need it for, and then make efforts to reduce that use. So as an example, so let's say if I'm wearing this sweater and to make it, a certain quantity of water has to be used.
Yes.
Now, a common example would be Levi's jeans. So they need to use water, and they measure for every jeans that they make, they need to use so many liters of water throughout the process, from the growing of cotton to dyeing it to processing it. And then they have targets to reduce that quantity. So WWF works actively with such large brands, Levi's, Gap, H&M, so all the world's large brands generally have this approach, and WWF helps them to understand where they use the water and where they could reduce it and get everyone involved. The person who's buying the fabric, if they had knowledge that if I'm buying fabric A or fabric B, and they choose to buy fabric B because it uses much less water, so the decision making goes right to the end consumer. So this is a simple explanation of what water stewardship is.
Excellent. And it's also educational, because then it means that a consumer that is more informed can demand certain things of the product, of the companies that they buy from, and then it can become a kind of mutually beneficial system also in ways.
So for example, WWF, we would like that every fabric that we buy, it should have a label to say how many liters of water have been. So far that is not the case, but if it were, then it would be a public declaration of that is how much natural resource water has been used to make that product. So you can make a conscious choice.
Quite right. And Munawar, do you find that in WaterAid's work in Pakistan, and now we're sort of going back to awareness building, and how a lot of, I think that in this part of the world, we've always seen water as a sort of a plentiful resource. And do you think that communities, it's been challenging to explain to communities that water is actually not, it's actually very scarce, and we need to be responsible about how we use it?
Yeah, it's very important aspect actually, awareness and education to the people. Maybe we should remember that water sources are limited. They are of the same quantum as the human population that is growing. So at some point, this resource will be literally scarce, and we have to find out water on this earth. For example, at 1947, when Pakistan was created, per capita availability of water for Pakistan was 5,000 meter cube per person. This
How much
has
water is
reduced
that?
significantly. I mean, a cubic meter is like, how can I explain it?
Like you know, a million, 100,000 buckets. I don't know, it always sounds like a lot. So basically there was so much, it was much more water. I understand. You're saying water is a fixed resource, but we have to be efficient about using it. But also I'm curious, going back to sanitation, how does access to sanitation make people's lives better?
Yeah. So that water that we had at the use in 1947 now is reduced to just 800 or 900 meter cubes. So from 5,000 per capita availability of water, it's just a 900 now in 2020, and it will reduce further. Now comes to sanitation. To maintain your hygiene in sanitation, you need water.
Yes.
And water is this one. So we have to explore the ways of our own management. 90% of water, little less, 90% of water is used by the agriculture. And our agricultural practices, you have seen that these are very, very irresponsible.
That's a huge amount of our water. 90%? I'm a little shocked because that means that everything else is only 10% of water usage. All are bathing and washing clothes and drinking, and that's just 10%.
Domestic purpose is even 1%. 9% is industry and other things.
Good Lord. Yeah, I'm like,
So
now we need better laws for water regulation for industries. There's no water.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think you picked up my brain. I think I was
sorry.
coming to this side. That government. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Government has to be now regulating our water resources. As Ali Saab mentioned, that we don't use meters for use of water anywhere you go. I worked in Africa. I worked in East Asia. I've been to different other countries.
Yeah.
Water meter is a very normal thing. Means when you get a water connection, you have a meter and you know that 1 cubic meter of water I use and I'll pay this much of amount. Whereas here, we have never experienced, only these few projects that Ali Saab just mentioned.
Yes, that's true.
They are demonstrating that this is possible and people are there to pay. Then why don't we demonstrate them for the entire country and we make them import? So this is one part of regulation. The other one is groundwater regulation. So and groundwater regulation, and it's very fluid here that anyone can go puncture a borehole and just get the water. I mean, no regulation, no approvals
Which is
are
leading
required.
to the overuse that Ali mentioned. So again, going back to toilets, because if clean water means that everybody's health improves. Clean water and access to sanitation and toilet facilities also keeps children in school. And I think that's a connection that I really want, Munawar Saab, for you to sort of elucidate, because it's something that we don't necessarily think about that much.
It's very important because in cities, if we look at our families, we will see that many of our children, they don't, if they don't like toilets in their school, they just control themselves. As soon as they rush in the home after school, they just rush to the toilet because they don't use in the school.
Yeah.
This is, I'm talking about good schools in the cities. When you look into the rural areas or peri-urban areas, either there are no toilets, or if they are not functional. If they are functional, they are very dirty. So still students have to bear that. And girls, they are the most victim of that. That is one thing where one is normal use of toilet. Another aspect of it is particularly the adolescent girls, when they go to school and there is menstruation time, they don't find any place to really clean themselves, to maintain their hygiene. This is one small thing that is kind of a taboo topic for us.
Quite right.
We don't talk about, even our families we don't talk about. So schools is not an exception. Teachers never talk about this with their girls.
Yeah.
And we have now, after these studies globally in different countries, we have seen that so many days of the studies that girls miss only because of menstruation time. At least every month, 2 to 3 days, the girls don't go to school because they don't have access to girls-friendly latrines.
And if that's 1 week every 3 weeks out of school, and it's already so difficult to get girls to school, then this just seems like an unnecessary waste of time for them, which actually has a very simple solution. So, Ali, I was thinking, I'm thinking of ways that we can sort of, again, conserve our water. And do you think that harvesting rainwater is a good option for us in this part of the world?
I think it certainly is, and especially where it is not so difficult to do so. Especially, let's say, for urban areas, because allowing rainwater to percolate into the ground is the main objective.
Right.
And we can do that in many ways.
Okay.
Like having sidewalks that allow the water to seep through, not having over concrete areas everywhere, have a mechanism where the rainwater from roof is collected and it is allowed to percolate in the ground. And
So
this would be done in earlier on, like in Lahore, there was a place called Dungi Ground.
Yes, there is, yes.
So the idea about a large parks, green areas which are slightly lower than the average level was to collect rainwater. And slowly the rainwater.
That's why it was a dungi ground.
That's why it was called the dungi ground.
Because I thought it was just sort of naturally
So I think city planners need to keep that in mind. If we only go for maximizing money generation for a few people, then you miss out on these common good services. So certainly collecting rainwater, allowing it to go in the ground.
As opposed to going into the gutter, which is what happens a lot of the time, that if water just stands on sidewalks and it's just there, it will go into the gutter where it's pointless.
It goes into the gutter and the gutter overflows.
Yes.
So both sewage are not served and the groundwater is not replenished. So allowing rainwater to go into the ground and replenish groundwater is a big factor that city planners, decision makers should keep in mind, and they do not do so at present.
But given how polluted also at least Lahore isn't this acid rain that we're getting, or just very dirty rain? Is it all right to collect that?
It's true that, first of all, maybe this makes one think that it's not a coincidence that our air is dirty. It is not a coincidence that our water is dirty. It is not a coincidence that our government schools are dysfunctional. Basically, something is seriously wrong in the human society. And since the whole mechanism has degraded, so we are firefighting on almost every front. I think your point is valid that yes, because if there's smog in the air, the rain that falls initially will not be clean, but at least the ground has its own way of letting it percolate down.
True.
And once the air is cleaned after the rainfall, so the next rainfall should be cleaner as long as we don't dirty the air again.
What can we do? Thank you so much, Ali. And thank you so much, Munawar, for being on the show. And this is, as you noticed, it was a very it's a multifaceted conversation, and so many things go into this together. It's not just the water, it's also the soil. It's not just the soil, it's also the air. It's not just the air, it's the people who are breathing the air. So all of us are in this together, and there are so many ways in which we can build our awareness and be more responsible. And I think the important thing is to, read up, to have some knowledge, and to then act on that and make a better world for all of us. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Coffee Table. Bye now.